In the heart of Boston stands a building that has welcomed everyone from presidents to assassins, from literary legends to revolutionaries. But some guests at the Omni Parker House never quite found the exit. For over 160 years, this prestigious hotel has earned its place as the longest continuously operating hotel in America. Yet behind its elegant facade lies something the brochures don't advertise, something that keeps security guards second-guessing their own eyes, and keeps guests awake long into the night wondering what they just witnessed. This is the story of a man so devoted to his work that death couldn't pull him away. This is the story of the Omni Parker House and why it's haunted. To understand why a ghost walks these halls, we need to go back to where it all began. 1855, Boston. Harvey D. Parker was not just a businessman. He was a perfectionist in an era when perfectionism was becoming the hallmark of success. He had a vision to create not just a hotel, but a sanctuary for the most important minds and influential people of America. When the Parker House opened its doors, it became something revolutionary. It wasn't merely a place to sleep, it was a meeting point for power. The Saturday Club, a prestigious gathering of the country's greatest literary minds, chose this hotel as their headquarters. Every last Saturday of the month, men like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. would sit within these walls, debating ideas that would shape American thought. Harvey Parker didn't just own this hotel, he lived in it. He was everywhere, checking every detail, greeting every guest personally, ensuring that every experience was flawless. He was the kind of man who couldn't delegate, who couldn't step back. His reputation became synonymous with the Parker House itself. But here's where the story becomes interesting. Harvey Parker didn't just work at the hotel, he died here. After dedicating his entire life to this establishment, after pouring his very soul into making it the most prestigious hotel on the East Coast, Harvey Parker passed away within its walls. And according to the accounts that would emerge decades later, he apparently decided he wasn't finished. The first documented mention of something unusual came in 1941, nearly 85 years after Harvey Parker's death. A bellman named John Brem worked at the Parker House for years. In 1992, he gave an interview to the Boston Globe recounting what he and other staff members had witnessed. Their stories pointed to one consistent detail: the 10th floor annex. Staff members reported seeing a figure they couldn't quite explain. A heavy-set man with a prominent black mustache, dressed in the period clothing of the late 1800s, walking the corridors as if he owned the place, which of course he had. But this man would vanish the moment anyone tried to approach him. By the 1950s, guests were beginning to report their own encounters. In 1950, an elderly woman staying near room 1078 had an experience she couldn't forget. Late in the evening, she saw something that made her blood run cold. It started as a mist, just a formless cloud of fog hanging in the air outside her room. But then, and this is where it becomes unsettling, the mist began to take shape. It condensed, solidified, transformed into the unmistakable figure of a man, a heavy-set older man with a black mustache staring directly at her. He didn't threaten her. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her with an expression that seemed almost curious, as if he were examining one of his guests, assessing whether they were comfortable, whether they were enjoying their stay. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he faded back into nothing. The woman was shaken. Security was called, but they found nothing on the 10th floor. No person, No explanation, just empty hallways, and the lingering question: what had she actually seen? But that was just the beginning. This next account is perhaps the most chilling because it features something that should be impossible: positive identification. A mother and daughter were staying in room 1012 on the 10th floor. It was like any other night. The daughter fell asleep, the mother settled in, but in the early morning hours, just as the sun was beginning to break through the darkness, the daughter's eyes opened. Standing at the foot of her bed was a man. He was dressed in clothing from the 1800s, formal attire that belonged to another era, and he was smiling, not menacingly, but warmly, as if he were genuinely delighted to see her. His expression seemed to communicate a single question: are you enjoying your stay? Is everything to your satisfaction? The daughter, startled but not terrified by his demeanor, smiled back in response, and in that moment, the man simply dissolved. He didn't walk away, he didn't fade gradually, he simply ceased to exist, as if acknowledging her response was all he needed. The daughter told her mother what she'd seen, and they were both confused. Who was this man? Where had he come from? How had he gone into a locked room? But the real shock came later that morning. As they were having breakfast in the dining room, the daughter's eyes caught on a portrait hanging on the wall. She froze. Her mother asked what was wrong. The daughter pointed at the painting and said, "That's him. That's the man I saw." It was a portrait of Harvey Parker. Now, we could dismiss this as coincidence. The daughter might have seen the portrait beforehand, her mind could have constructed an image, but the specificity of the account, the clothing, the expression, the demeanor of a host asking if guests were comfortable, all of it pointed to the same impossible conclusion. The founder of the hotel was still checking on his guest, even in death. So why does Harvey Parker remain? What keeps a man's spirit tethered to a place for over 160 years after his body has turned to dust? The answer lies in understanding the man himself. Harvey Parker wasn't just running a business. He had constructed his entire identity around the Parker House. Every guest who stayed here, he treated as a personal responsibility. Every detail mattered because his reputation mattered. The hotel wasn't a job. It was his life's work, his legacy, his purpose. In the 19th century, a man like Harvey Parker didn't have a retirement plan. He didn't have a succession strategy. He didn't plan to one day hand things over to someone else. His work was his existence. And when death came, whether sudden or gradual, he found himself at a crossroads. His body could be buried, his name could fade from the business ledgers, but his commitment, his obsession, his need to ensure that every guest was satisfied, that didn't die. It couldn't die. It was too deeply woven into his essence. So Harvey Parker, in some form that science cannot yet explain, remained. Not as a threat, not as a malevolent force, but as a dutiful host, checking on guests, walking the corridors, maintaining his eternal vigil over the establishment that was his soul. This is perhaps the most common explanation for why places become haunted. Not because of tragedy or violence, but because of love, because of devotion, because someone loves something so much that they couldn't bear to leave it behind. Over the decades, the reports didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied. Guests reported hearing friendly voices whispering outside their rooms, the sounds of people returning from an evening out, conversing happily. But whenever anyone opened the door to investigate, the hallways were empty. Room 1040 became notorious. Security was called multiple times to address noise complaints. Each time, they arrived to find the room utterly empty. No guests, no source of the disturbance. The complaints would fade, only to happen again months later. Then there are the sounds that shouldn't exist. Guests on the 10th floor reported hearing the rhythmic creaking of a rocking chair throughout the night. The sound was consistent, maddening, impossible to ignore. But here's the thing, there are no rocking chairs on the 10th floor. There never have been. What were they hearing? And then there were the lights, floating orbs of bright light moving down the corridors before vanishing into the walls. Bellhop saw them, guests saw them, and each time the logical explanation remained elusive. But Harvey Parker may not be alone in his eternal residency. The 3rd floor has its own mystery. Charles Dickens, the legendary author, stayed at the Parker House for 5 months, living in room 303. And just as Harvey Parker seems unable to leave, so too does Dickens. Guests report that the elevators, without anyone pressing buttons, without anyone waiting on the floor, routinely travel to the 3rd floor on their own, as if answering a call from someone who no longer exists. And room 303? It carries the smell of whiskey and strong cigars. Despite housekeeping cleaning it thoroughly, the smell returns. It's the smell of Dickens' habits, his preferences, his very presence somehow embedded into the space itself. There's also the account from a security officer who saw the shadow of a man on the wall, perfectly clear, perfectly defined. The officer stepped aside to allow the man to pass, but there was no one there, just a shadow wearing a stovepipe hat cast by someone who no longer exists in the physical world. Interestingly, the reports of Harvey Parker himself have become less frequent in recent decades. What was common in the 1940s and 1950s, what continued through the 1980s and 1990s, has quieted in recent years. Some believe this means Parker has finally found peace, that his work is done, his legacy secure, and he can finally rest. Others wonder if he's still there, still watching, but has simply become more subtle about his presence. Less visible, more integrated into the building itself. We don't have a definitive answer. We only have the accounts, the testimonies, and the decades of documentation that something unusual exists within the Omni Parker House. The Omni Parker House stands today as a testament to American history. Presidents have walked its halls, legends have slept in its rooms, and according to the stories that have accumulated over more than a century, some of those legends never quite checked out. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, one thing is undeniable. The Parker House has stories worth telling. Stories about devotion, about legacy, about a man who loved his work so much that death couldn't pull him away. So if you find yourself in Boston, if you book a room at the historic Omni Parker House, take note of the details. Pay attention to the sounds in the hallway. Watch the elevators as they move to floors where no one called them. And if you happen to see a heavy-set man with a black mustache dressed in the clothing of another era, asking if you're enjoying your stay, well, now you'll know who you're dealing with.